You're listening to CinePunked, interactive discussions for film lovers. This episode, it's Biller time. I'm Robert JE Simpson, and as promised in the last show, we're deviating a little from our usual format and are bringing you another of our exclusive one-on-one interviews. The CinePunked is excited to be talking today to one of the most individual and multifaceted filmmakers of the moment. Director, producer, actor, set designer, costume maker, composer, there's not a single aspect of the film unit she hasn't turned her hand to. A graduate of UCLA and the California Institute of the Arts, after a swathe of short films, her debut feature as director, Viva, was released in 2007. And this was followed up in 2016 by the much-lauded The Love Witch. I'm joined now via phone from LA by Anna Biller herself.
Yes.
Okay, so Anna, thank you very much for chatting to us. You're very welcome to CinePunked. We've been chatting about The Love Witch in our last program, and I think that you are possibly one of the most interesting filmmakers that's working at the moment, because what you're doing does seem to be very, very different in terms of your approach. I think one of the things that strikes me in particular is your sense of control over the production, and how that sits with sort of ideas of auteurism.
Yes. Well, I started as a studio artist. So the idea was that as an artist, you take an idea or a concept, you're trying to illustrate something that's complex, and you do it through a form. And so that's how I was trained, is that you're trying to express an idea that's a social or cultural or aesthetic idea, and then you choose a form and you try to express that, not directly but more indirectly. So for me, creating a movie isn't really just about directing actors or writing a script. It's about how does the form, how does the form itself express the intention and the meaning, right? So it's sort of an art school approach.
Uh-huh.
So I feel like making a film is just an extension of when I used to do work in my studio. And I remember, I had endless critiques for years in art school, and you would talk about things like, I remember like talking for 3 hours, for example, like somebody would take a photograph,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be framed in a gilded thrift store frame. And we would spend the whole 3 hours talking about the frame because it was like, because that's what art school critiques are like. So it's like you're looking at everything, and everything means something. It's like, okay, so this is a photo, and it was taken, but what is it? What is the frame saying about the picture? The fact that you went to a thrift store and you found this old gold frame, and what does it mean that you're framing it like that? Because it does mean something. So I learned that everything means something. That there's nothing that's really arbitrary when you're presenting something to the world. And so I noticed that a lot of films are kind of arbitrary because they're put together by a number of different departments, and
Uh-huh.
each one is working separately. And there might be some overall supervision. The director supervises the departments, but often the director isn't really that interested in what the costume designer is doing or what the production designer is doing or what the editor is doing. And they tend to get more interested in the editing, but they may just be kind of like a sort of a supervisor, and all the departments are kind of working separately, and they all put it together. So you have a number of different visions. And I guess as a studio artist, that doesn't make any sense to me to put together a movie that way, because then what does it mean? You don't know what it means at that point. Because if I've done 5 years researching a topic, then what's in my brain can't possibly be in anybody else's brain that's only working on it for 3 months, that's just been hired as a job. They can't read all the books I've read.
Uh-huh.
They can't watch all the films I've watched. They can't have my history of critical thinking. So what are they going to? So what choices are they going to make? So for me, it becomes very important, like what colors are in the frame, what sort of costumes, what the shape of the costumes are,
Mm-hmm.
how the makeup is. So these things become part of the entire content, not just a script, and they become like, so basically I have 2 scripts. One is the written script,
Mm-hmm.
and then once I finish that, then I make the visual script. And I feel like the visual script becomes so important that when people watch my films, they tend to focus more on the visual script than on the written script. It becomes more, that script becomes more important to people, a little bit to my detriment, because often they miss the written script, which actually is usually more important. They miss the entire meaning of, but the meaning is there. The meaning is in the visuals too.
I certainly think that the visuals to your films are something that very definitely grabs the attention and brings people in. And because it stands out, it's very, very different from pretty much any filmmaking that I've seen recently. So your films are...
Well, I've seen some really beautiful set design and costume design in movies lately, especially period films. But I think the difference is that they're not. It's not like what I do, which is choosing it for, almost like a symbolic and thematic reason that goes with the overall idea. I think that's the difference, and that's why people notice it so much, because the costumes and colors are expressing the same ideas that the script is expressing. So it's like doubling or amplifying the meaning. So it becomes almost funny to people, which is why some people have labeled The Love Witch a comedy, even though it's a tragedy. It's a kind of sort of like you amplify your meaning, so it becomes almost like overly symbolic. And then people think that that's just like a joke. People have called The Love Witch a one-line joke, which is really sad because you spend years working on something, and how can it be a one-line joke? I don't understand. It's almost like it becomes like so much that it becomes nothing. I don't know. I don't really understand, but that's the impression some people get. They're overwhelmed by like the number of symbols.
I think
so they stop trying to read the symbols anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a temptation with your films and probably with a lot of films is people come at them very much on a sort of surface level, so that they get that visual assailing first of all, and I think most people are blown away by the aesthetics of it. But they're also very keen to define things. So one of the issues, I mean, you've already raised it, the fact that it was labeled as a comedy. And actually, when we were chatting about this the other week, that was the definition that I kept on reading, was people referring to it as a sort of horror comedy, which it isn't really. It's a film that sort of defies a lot of simple clarifications and sort of genre labels. So I think of something like The Wicker Man, for example, which is, is a horror. It's sort of in that horror kind of folky vibe. I don't think it's a million miles away from what you're doing, because it's also partly a musical. It's partly a thriller. There's a lot more going on to that than it's just a horror film or it's just a comedy.
Well, I think part of the problem is that we've dropped certain genres from film descriptions that are the most ancient genres. So, for example, we've retained comedy, but we've dropped tragedy. So things get defined as drama or horror or thriller, but actually what I've made is a tragedy. And so it's structurally a tragedy. It's like a Shakespearean tragedy, because a tragedy is where a character, as has a fatal flaw, and that fatal flaw is very clear to the audience, and it signals their downfall and the downfall of all the other people around them, and people die tragically because of the flaws in the thinking of this character who has hubris, but whom you have sympathy for. So structurally, it's absolutely a tragedy. One device I use, though, is I use a comedy device in the middle of the film. But see, that's using that, which is the wedding. So like a Shakespearean comedy always ends with a wedding. That's because it's a union. So like tragedy ends in death, a comedy ends in a wedding. and so if you put the wedding as a mock wedding, and it's not at the end, and it's something that doesn't come true, all you're doing is amplifying the tragedy, because you're showing what could have been. So what could have been, what should have been, and what was lost and gone and killed is also the essence of tragedy. So structurally, it's a tragedy. Absolutely, it's not a comedy at all. So people miss that. But then other people aren't like sitting around and reading Northrop Frye's, analysis of dramatic structures all day like I am.
I find it really interesting that people take that moment as being a moment of comedy as well, because when I watch the film, and I've watched this a few times now, I don't see that marriage as actually being something that's quite jovial. I see that's quite a malevolent sequence.
Well, it's really that moment. I feel like it's the moment when you have the symbol of the tarot card with the three swords piercing through the heart. I feel it's the moment when you feel Elaine's heart being stabbed right there, because it's like it's her what you see is her desire, her ultimate desire. This is what she's wanted all along. It's being fulfilled, but it's not being fulfilled. So it's like it's sort of like a trickster thing. It's like the jester, the trickster. They're tricking her into thinking she's getting what she wants. She's not really getting it, because the sword in the heart is his voiceover where he's saying he's never going to love her. He's not capable of loving her. So we've already seen this echoed in the whole rest of the movie. These men are not capable of loving her.
Yeah.
So because she wants them to love her, and because she somehow causes the tragedy and death of everyone who doesn't love her around her, then we know there's going to be a tragedy when he doesn't love her. So it's just been set up that way. So I don't know why that's funny. Most people think that, romance, is romance funny? Is somebody wanting to be loved funny? We live in a time where like anything that really is serious is seen as funny. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, that can't be for real. You can't be doing a real Shakespearean romance tragedy because that's too silly in our day and age. So it has to be sort of a Monty Python-esque take on it. That's the only take that's possible anymore. And you can't seriously just be talking about love in this day and age. You could do it 100 years ago or 50 years ago. You can't do it anymore. So it's almost like people are policing what emotions we're allowed to express. So there's emotions like love. They can't be expressed in film. You can do it in music. So all the music artists, all the pop artists write about love still, and that's fine in pop music. But you can't do it in movies. It's always like things have become so compartmentalized. That things like glamour. See, pop music and music videos, they have all these things in them, like love, true love, glamour. Things that, drama, but you can't have them in movies.
I do think, again, it comes back down to that. I think it's the aesthetics of the film just confuse a lot of audiences. I think, one of the things that I know that that people have picked up on with you numerous times now is the fact that people find it hard to work out, is this a film that is contemporary set or it's a period piece? And so with that, and when you if you buy into the idea that it is something that it's drawing inspiration from films of the 60s and 70s, there's a sort of hyper reality to it as well. And I think that's possibly why people skew it, why they kind of end up thinking that this is a film that is about something else. It's, the comedy moments, which are needed in any script. And you can have a very serious drama and still have moments of levity.
Oh, absolutely. There are jokes written in, absolutely. But although, Hamlet is also very funny.
Yeah.
Full of jokes.
But I think with you, what people are trying to do is they are so determined to label things that they've picked up on that and they've gone, okay, so this is a comedy. This is how we're supposed to treat this. And
well, they should really, maybe they should also look at it more as a fairy tale, because in a fairy tale, everything is heightened. The princess is the most beautiful princess, right? And she has the most beautiful gowns. She's the fairest in the land. It's really like, it's a fairy tale about a princess who doesn't get her prince.
Yeah.
And it's made very clear in the dialogue that that's what she wants. She says she wants a handsome prince on a white horse. She says it in the very first dialogue scene. And her self-construction as a princess, as like a fairy princess in the contemporary world. So this is like about a character who's trying to be something. She's trying to please men by being the most sexy woman alive. She's also trying to please her own internal fantasies by being the most beautiful princess in the land. And this is not at all unusual for girls. So we have all of these movies about male fantasy and male superheroes and gladiators, big muscles and their veins popping out of their neck, and they're fighting sword fights, and nobody's laughing at that. I'm just creating a female fantasy. It's just it's pure and simple female fantasy, coming from classic archetypes of female fantasy. But it's also what it's doing is intertwining like the kind of male fantasy with the female fantasy and showing where they intersect and then where they separate. So it's not like I want to make it like it's as simple as between sex and love.
Mm.
The men want sex and she wants love. It's more that the men just don't see her, and this is really the tragedy of it for me. It's that they can't see who she is. They can take her potions and everything, and they can be appreciative of how she's so beautiful and everything. But everybody's sort of locked into their own fantasy life and their own narcissism.
Mm.
So in that sense, I feel like it's very adult and it's very psychologically realistic. So it's not really about. It's not about making fun of movies. It's really not about movies at all. It's only about movies in the sense that I'm taking my cinema fantasies and I'm using those. So that's the other layer, is that I have fantasies about images, about glamour, about lighting that come from watching a lot of classic movies. And that's not a joke for me. Those are just the movies I love and I think that are really good. And I really think that cinephiles the world over also think those movies are really good. So nobody's laughing at the red shoes. But if I'm aspiring to make the red shoes, then somehow I'm ridiculous. But I'll always aspire to make the red shoes because I think it's the best movie ever made. and if I fail, of course I'll fail. But it's an aspiration. And I think other people maybe they're aspiring to make a Scorsese movie or Spielberg movie, and maybe they don't really reach that. But the aspiration itself is taken seriously.
Mm.
You see.
So
my aspiration towards that is not taken seriously, which I think it should be, because it's a human aspiration towards beauty, so towards some kind of craft and beauty.
Do you think that perhaps then part of the problem, part of the reason for that, particularly with The Love Witch, is because that is loosely a genre piece, and the industry has never been that kind to genre filmmakers?
No, I really think it's because I think it's really because people think of it as old-fashioned, and I think people are embarrassed about the past. Whereas I'm not embarrassed about the past. I think the past is better, and so it really has to do with your feelings about cinema history. I think, like people who watch a lot of classic movies, they have no problem with The Love Witch. They actually don't even see that, which is funny. They don't have a split or like some kind of like, this is so weird. Why does it look like this? Why is it lit like that? What's wrong with these people? Why are they acting that way? They don't have any of those. They don't have any of those kinds of problems with it because the movies they watch look and feel that way.
This is very, very, very true.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from, because I've watched so many of these classic movies. For me, Love is just a movie. And I was trying to, so I have a script, I'm trying to express a movie. It's more that my thinking in terms of how do you construct a movie? How do you block it? How do you light it? How do you write for actors is similar to someone living maybe in 1960. So I don't have that, I don't have that much of a postmodern distance from what I'm doing. So maybe that makes me a crazy person. But, but that's actually where I'm coming from. It's not irony. It's not irony at all. There's no irony there, actually. In terms of, there's irony in the script in terms of the gender relations. There's satire. It's a satire of gender relations, but there's no satire in the cinema itself. I'm just trying to create pure cinema.
Mm. Yeah, I can take that. I mean, I think that when you look at Love Witch and compare it to Viva, you're kind of the way that you're dealing with the relationships and I'm very aware at the moment that we're in this really interesting time in terms of female power and representation within cinema and the kind of the comeback to the exposés that have been going on in recent years. And you can't help but view films in a different way now. So when I look at your films, I think that this is great. There's somebody who's in total control of every aspect of the production, and it is very clearly your vision that is making its way onto the screen. But there's also, there is a satire and there is a commentary, I think, on sort of relationships and on the male gaze. You've talked about in some of your articles on your blog about Laura Mulvey and her theories about this, and Viva in particular. Seems to play about with those sort of exploitative films of the 1970s and put a mirror up to them and say, look, these were actually, for me, they're kind of saying that these weren't that pleasant. The men are pretty horrible, pretty misogynistic. But you're still sort of engaging with some of the language and sort of the techniques. And it.
Well, see, for me, because I like classic cinema, I guess the misunderstanding is that I'm engaging with the language and techniques of exploitation or sexploitation movies. I'm engaging with the language of classic movies. And classic movies were kind of all sort of like so any movie from 1972 has that kind of lighting and set design. Actually, I mean, the biggest budget movies, like every movie, it's just a sort of there was a certain color palette, a certain type of lighting. It's just the way movies looked.
Yeah.
So I was actually with Viva. I was trying to make a movie that was set in 1972 that looked like it came from 1972, and the reason for that is that I was trying to imitate the Playboy magazine and trying to recreate the world of Playboy magazine at the time. So most of the imagery did come from Playboys from 1972. But with The Love Witch, I was trying to do something different. So I guess, for The Love Witch, I was just trying to create a world that seemed witchy to me. It seemed like a world of witches. And so this starts to have a fantasy in terms of witches wearing capes and cloaks and wreaths and having fire and this type of long black hair, and just sort of a mythic idea of witches and how witches live, and also this idea of the main character having this kind of bewitching glamour. And glamour, the word glamour has to do with bewitching.
Yeah.
So the idea is that for the films, I'm trying to take the film and place it within the world that the script creates. There's a sort of a world, and the world is full of just kind of obvious symbols that you can use. And so I really love to bring out all of those symbols, like all the ideas about the symbolic visual world. It's not dissimilar to Robert Eger's film The Witch in that sense, because he was trying to create a world of symbols of witches, and that was, I guess, 17th century, and this is modern day. But it's still sort of this idea of trying to create this mythology, and this visual mythology around the world that you're creating. So, and I guess again, the disconnect is me not. I'm not copying I'm not trying to copy other movies. What I'm doing is I'm just using a more classical form of cinematography.
Yeah. No.
So that's really all it is. I mean, because cinematography changed really radically in the 70s, going and later, to the point where the kinds of light, just even if you light something with a kind of hard lighting and key lighting, and use all these different lights to define a face, for example, that already looks very, very retro. But fashion photographers do it all the time. This is a type of photography that's it's classic photography. And if you use classic photography in a modern movie, people think it's an old movie. And it's just really the type of lighting that I really enjoy. Portrait photography. Again, if you look at a Michael Powell film, you look at every close-up in The Red Shoes and in any Michael Powell film, you see this extraordinary lighting. It's bringing out the cheekbones. It's highlighting. There's a ping in the eyes. The hair has a backlight, so there's this shine on the back of the hair. It's separated from the background. It looks three-dimensional. That's what we were doing. We're doing that kind of lighting. That has nothing to do with exploitation. You know what I mean? So maybe Russ Meyer also lit his actresses nicely, but again, so did everyone. So did Jack Cardiff, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see the exploitation connection in terms of how it looks, other than when you actually have shots of people that are nude or having sex or something. I don't really see that. And there's so little of the Love Witch that is about nudity or anything like that.
No, I think guess for me it's maybe some of the content sometimes or some of the thematic issues. I mean, so witchcraft, for instance, is something that for me. I mean, the horror films that I watched growing up, the Hammer Gothics and things were stuff that were gorgeous. This was all part of it. I always personally got very absorbed into anything that involved witchcrafts and the occult.
Yeah. In the 60s and 70s, I know there was a big push towards witchcraft and the occult, and so that was part of it in designing Elaine's look and all of that. But
and I mean,
I didn't grow up watching those films myself, and I really haven't seen that many of. I mean, I like some of the Hammer films, but I really don't have much of a history of watching many of those films that people keep saying I'm drawing from. Like I still haven't seen most of them. I really am mainly watching. I was studying films really more for the scripts. I was studying films like Leave Her to Heaven or The Locket or, these films that have female toxic narcissists in them or sociopaths or Angel Face, a lot of noir films. I was looking at Bergman. So the stuff so I was a bit surprised because I know the imagery is witchcraft imagery, but I was a bit surprised by how nobody was picking up on all the actual psychological references that I put into it, which are mostly from film noir, really.
Well, I mean, there's something that we I'd love to get into because I was reading your recent blog on sort of the labeling of films as feminist, and how problematic that is. I'm on side with you on that one. I do agree it is problematic. Two of the recent examples that have been hailed that I have a difficulty with would be last year's Wonder Woman and The Three Billboards, both of which are being kind of acclaimed as sort of feminist films, neither of which to me are particularly feminist, other than there's a strong female lead.
There's a female character in it.
That's it. I mean,
that's not enough. That's not enough to make a movie feminist. What I say on my blog piece is that you have to actually have a film that has the specific agenda of raising awareness about inequality between men and women. Social inequality. The social inequality between men and women has to be a conflict in the film and has to be expressed either overtly through dialogue or through the plot or conflicts between the characters. It has to be about gender inequality. If your film is not about gender equality, then it's not a feminist film. And this is this is my feeling about it, because feminism is a social agenda, and I don't really think films should be manifestos either. Is another thing I'll say. I don't think that's necessarily a good goal for a movie to have. Is to be like a manifesto about promoting a social agenda, because then it's just James Joyce called that pornography. He said if you're making a manifesto, that's pornography because you're trying to sell something. It's the same as trying to sell a car. You're trying to sell an ideology. So it's not necessarily, a goal that I think films should have. But a film can have that as sort of a side goal. It can have that as it could sort of be in the film without the entire film being a manifesto. Right. But it has to at least be in there somewhere in the fabric of the film, in the script. Like I would say overtly in the script. It has to be in the script. Otherwise, it's not feminist film. And there are very few films. I think there are almost no films made anymore where that is in the fabric of the script, not for decades. And I think that is one reason why film feels retro. This is the funny thing about it, is because in the 70s and the 60s, there were movies that were made about gender issues, about struggles between men and women. There was a war of the sexes, and it was being expressed in movies, in mainstream movies. And I'm doing that, and actually, in a funny way, makes it feel very old-fashioned, because nobody does it anymore.
Is that a conscious decision on your part, though, to kind of?
Of course it is. Yes. There literally is a speech in the burlesque club about gender inequality.
Yeah.
It's literally there are two paragraphs, characters speaking, and that those two paragraphs boy, you should hear how people bitch and moan, because it's only 2 paragraphs in the entire film, and they're short paragraphs. And not only are they short, but the image you see over them is of a very beautiful burlesque dancer stripping. So it's not like you're just having to sit and listen to it. You get to see that, So it's not, so not like trying to torment people. It's like literally like maybe like a little over a minute of people talking about the history of women's oppression. And, and it's this incredible scene with all these quick cuts, of a dancer stripping. She has a beautiful body.
Yeah.
And these beautiful witches sitting at a table, and everything is extremely aesthetic, and it's very short. And boy, I have read reviews of men just tearing that apart and saying, that's the movie stopped for them, and what is this shit? What is this feminist shit, bullshit? And this is, she doesn't know how to edit. She doesn't know what she's doing. It's just people are so offended. And it's like, of course, I knew that was not conventional to do that. But that's something that feminist movies from the 70s used to do. They used to actually, have like a little bit of a lecture.
Uh-huh.
But again, the lecture wasn't, like, I'm not trying to lecture the audience. The lecture was to show the audience that was Elaine's indoctrination from the witches. She was indoctrinated in a slightly evil way because they were teaching her. They were teaching her what all women basically are taught, which is the way you get by in the world and the way you become successful in the world is by using your sexuality, like be sexy for men, and then that'll get you anywhere. That's a demonic message, by the way. It's taken directly from Anton LaVey, because women should value themselves in more ways than that,
Mm-hmm.
It's a terrible message. So the thing is that the witches are teaching this to Elaine, and you can see that this teaching has just led to her downfall. And then you see these young girls being taught that, and they're going to be taught wrong. But it's not just that the witches are being taught that. It's just like all 14, 13-year-old girls learn that, and they don't learn it like directly in school. They learn it from social media, from YouTube. They just learn it. They learn it from how they're treated in school, by all the they see all the rewards that the pretty girls get that they don't get.
Mm-hmm.
All the pretty girls being praised, being told how great they are, not only by boys but by their mothers, by everybody. See what I'm saying? So the pretty girls, the sexy girls, get all the rewards, and everyone knows that, and whether people talk about it or not. So so I just have a couple. I have a few sentences where the witches are teaching the young girls that this is the way it is, and they're learning that. And for me, that's a heartbreaking scene, because that's what you learn when you're a girl.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's not what Elaine wants. So there's that juxtaposition between what Elaine wants, which is someone to really love her for who she is, and what the world is telling girls they need to do, which is just be a commodity. And so the demonic thing about the movie is that she, tries to get what she wants, which is someone to really love her, through being a commodity. And this is basically almost what almost all women do on some level. So this is about women's lives. And and talk about not funny. That's not funny. And
No.
That's where that ties in with the Me Too movement and everything. All the women who don't speak up about the abuse that's happened to them because they've learned that you don't do that. They learn that you be sexy, you be beautiful, you be desirable. And then when a man like touches you and it's unwanted and it's gross, you should see that as a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
And you should see that as a favor. You should see that as something, like you've succeeded in some way in capturing a man's attention who's in a position of power, and you should feel lucky. And, women who are molested by men in power are constantly told they're lucky that men paid attention to them. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So a lot of this is just, what?
Oh, sorry, I was just agreeing with you. I absolutely understand, yeah.
Yeah. So like the movie is about all that. That's really what the movie is about. The movie is about the pitfalls of trying to navigate in the world being a woman. And it's heartbreaking. That's the tragedy. The tragedy isn't that men die, because the men are really just symbolic. They're not really. I mean, the men are. They're ciphers.
Mm-hmm.
Elaine is the real character. It's Elaine. It's what Elaine has to go through just to get any sort of fragment or shred of dignity or love or anything from anywhere, and she's not getting it. She's not going to get it. So it also shows. I mean, so that's also the humor of it. The humor is that no matter how beautiful she is and how nice she is, it actually doesn't work because the power structures are in place and they're not changing.
And ultimately, she doesn't seem.
Because it has to do with the way people think. It has to do with the way men think, the way men treat women, what they feel entitled to. So that's what the movie's about. So like people. I like the way that people take it, whatever the way they can take it, based on what they know already and what their tastes are, and if they love giallo films or if they love exploitation and that's how they take it, that's great because it means that it's still accessible to them, even though they like give zero shits about like feminism or like what a girl's life is like or anything, So I like the fact that it's accessible to people, but also the fact that people don't even see what the movie is about actually illustrates my point about how hard it is for girls in the world, because you make a story about a girl and her struggles in the world and how harrowing that struggle is, and people don't even see that you're even doing that because people have so little interest in girls' lives that they don't even see that you're even doing that, even though it's so overt. But girls see it. So young girls know exactly what I'm doing. So it's a kind of movie that is more accessible to like a 17-year-old girl than it is to a 50-year-old man. I find that interesting.
Definitely, it does seem to split the sexes somewhat. I mean, I think I probably misinterpreted some of Elaine's processes as well. I had her pinned down as a predatory figure, which she, I mean,
well, she is. That's the thing.
Oh, is
it's
she?
Complicated because she is.
Because we've had this argument on the podcast, and I would like an answer.
No, she is a predatory character, but see, people are different things. So we're used to having men be different things at the same time, but we're not used to having women be different things at the same time. Because we have so few complex female characters. We're used to having a man who's a villain, but you also, you have empathy for him because of this or that or the other, and you understand that he's complex, he's conflicted. So we don't really have that about women, but also we're so used to looking at beautiful women and just looking at them and objectifying them. And that's what the film is about as well, because it's giving you the opportunity to do that. Every opportunity a man wants to have to ogle a beautiful woman and just look at her as an object, he can do that with this film. He's being invited to do that, but it's a trick. Because it's really a movie about a woman's interior.
Well,
so it is almost like a fairy tale where you're given two choices, and it's this thing. You see what I mean? It's like the women know it's a woman. It's a movie about a woman's interior. All women know that pretty much. Most women, 90% of women, 95% know that it's not about objectifying a woman. It's about a woman's interior life. And the majority of men do not know that.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And that's where the irony and comedy come in for men, because they think that's why men think I'm making fun of the 60s or something, like the values then. No, it's about now. This movie's about now. That's why it's set now.
Yeah.
That's why I'm setting it now. Yeah.
No, I think I understood most of that watching it. But yeah, I mean,
I know it's complicated. Yeah, and we're not used to going into movies with that kind of. But this is why I'm saying it is so much more related to the noir films, right? So the difference, in my view, between the noir films and the exploitation films is that the noir films often were about a woman's interior. They had beautiful women who are extremely gorgeous and glamorous, but you're not just supposed to look at them and ogle them and stare at them like you are in a Russ Meyer movie. It's about them. It's about them as people. And so the exploitation films, they dropped out female psychology, female complexity, women's stories, women being equal characters, and you're now just supposed to, it's the sexual evolution, so now you're just supposed to ogle women.
Yeah.
And the woman's point of view just drops out, which is why I'm saying my films have very little to do with exploitation, because they're referencing a period before that shift happened, where we're supposed to look at women just as objects in movies. And then also the shift that happened was that then you suddenly have the Madonna and horse split really strongly, whereas you have the plain girl and she's a person, and then you have the sexy girl and she's not a person. But like in the 40s, the sexy girl was a person. So this is partly the confusion, is that you have the sexy girl and she's a person, and we haven't seen that in decades.
No, one of the things that you talked about on one of your blogs was the Woman in Peril movies, which are sadly they are a favorite of mine. The idea, that those kind of women who are in these situations where they're being psychologically controlled. Not that I think this is a great thing for people to do, but more in the sense that I think that there's actually a reflection there, and particularly at the moment in terms of things like our awareness of domestic abuse, for example, and you kind of look at those films and you can kind of see how women have been manipulated and how men tried to manipulate, and it seems quite a forward-thinking kind of genre, really, to exist at all, from so long ago.
Are you talking about? I didn't hear what. Hear what the first said. Did you?
Talking about the women in peril movies.
Oh, Women in Peril. Yeah. Exactly. And it's mainly the pre-code movies.
Yeah.
That were so there was so much about humanizing women. They were showing women might be like bad women, they might be prostitutes, or they might be, just sort of manipulating men or stealing money or something. But it always showed the social circumstances around how that happened. So it always humanized the woman, had tremendous empathy for her because she was given a raw deal.
Mm-hmm.
She came from poverty. She tried every way possible to be legitimate and do things a legitimate way. Men were terrible to her. Then she had really bad breaks. And this is the only way the only thing she can do to survive. And often then there's a story in there. Like I just saw this great movie again, this pre-code movie called Millie. So you see a woman like that. She's a fallen woman, et cetera. She's like lost her daughter because her husband took her daughter because she just had to give her up to the divorce. He was having all these affairs. But then in the end, she like shoots a man who's trying to molest her teenage daughter. and it's like, so shows she's inside. She's just this kind of tigress who will do anything to protect her daughter. So she's like this incredible mother, She's done, the reason she gave up her daughter is because she wanted her daughter to have more than she could give her. She wanted her to have a good life and everything. So it just shows, so there are all these movies like that showed women, and they're just like these incredible people who can just survive anything. And they're incredible mothers, and they have incredible empathy and heart and intelligence.
They're properly three-dimensional characters.
Yeah, they're really, really, they're great characters. Yeah, and they're just amazing. And it just shows like, and they're amazing the way women are amazing. They're not amazing because they're like a man and they can do superhero feats or stunts. They're amazing because of their traits that are really female. Things like just this kind of practicality and intelligence and this kind of fierceness in protecting the people they love, and this kind of resourcefulness, always being able to, figure out what to do next, and sometimes also their intelligence in the way they can manipulate men when they have to, because the men have been so often it's like the men have been using them, manipulating them, and then they turn the tables on the man. Like a great example of that is the movie Babyface with Barbara Stanwyck, where she's And literally, this movie is so amazing because she's in the very worst circumstances. Her father is, you can't believe the story. She's like, her father is prostituting her out to like strange men. And so she's like a teenager. This is the most horrible thing. She works in this bar, and men are constantly molesting her and everything. It's the most terrible life. And there's this older man that comes in the bar, and he keeps giving her Nietzsche books, Will to Power, and he's telling her that she has to be the superwoman, and then she takes his advice, and then she goes and she climbs her way up the ladder, man by man, but using will to power. It's amazing.
Your next project is very much influenced by these kind of films, I believe. The
Yeah,
Bluebeard.
it's going to be. I'm kind of getting sick of all this sexploitation references, so I might take all the nudity away from the men this time. They don't get to have it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's one of the things I love about Love Witch is, first of all, Samantha Robinson actually gets to keep her dignity. I mean, because while she's very sexy and she's in these nude scenes, she's not nude herself at any point. There's
Right.
always something masking, her her erogenous zones that all the guys are kind of sitting there waiting to see. And I love that. I also love the fact that you've got penises on display, because it's one of the things that I feel that we need more of on screen, because we're perfectly okay with seeing the full frontal female figure, but we do not see full frontal males very often, and you have an abundance of them. So
my principle starting with making Viva was that if I'm going to have female nudity, I have to have an equal amount of male nudity. Otherwise, I won't do it.
Yeah.
Because it isn't about exploiting women. It's just about showing a lifestyle. So witches have a naked lifestyle.
Yeah.
And in the Playboy, there were so many nudists in all the scenes, and scenes with all kinds of naked. A lot of the Playboy cartoons that I drew from all these naked people. So just trying to draw from those. But from the next one, it'll be much more directly referencing noir film in a way that I think people will finally see that's what it is.
Mm.
I think I've been a little bit timid or fearful. I've been a little bit like Elaine in the sense that I've been afraid to not please men. In my filmmaking.
Right.
I have wanted, I have wanted to maybe give them some sexual entertainment, very uniquely in a way. To say, well, can I have my movie? Will you look at it? Will you screen it? And I think, this is partly because I've been literally directly told by programmers that they needed to see more nudity in my film.
Right.
Or they wouldn't program them. I actually had male programmers tell me that. My films are too family friendly. This is when I was making shorts. And it never even occurred to me to put nudity or violence in a movie. I just never even thought about it.
Uh-huh.
It was like, oh, well, is that the way to make a movie and get people to watch it? Well, it seems like it certainly is. But then when you do it, then they ignore everything else you're trying to do, and they only focus on that.
Well, I would love to see your next feature kind of flaunt that, because I mean, surely by now, your filmmaking is recognized enough that people don't need that they know that your filmmaking is excellent, that there's great ideas and concepts and everything else, and that's what should be encouraged, not mere titillation.
Yeah, hopefully, I'm feeling more confident. I have this script that's very much like almost like a Hitchcock script. It's very much like like one of those classic woman in peril pictures. I'm quite excited about it.
Okay, I can't wait to see that. I got to be honest. I do want to kind of briefly touch, if we can, on sort of your process, because it does seem to take you a long time to make each of your films as well. Is that because you're so? I mean, you control pretty much every department of a film, it seems.
It's a lot of it is budget actually too, because we just simply didn't have the pre-production budget for the costumes and the sets, and I just didn't know how to come up with more money. And
Okay.
So it's like you can spend a year, for example, or 2 years, 3 years, people spend raising more money.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time when I was trying to raise more money, I just started sewing and designing while I was doing that. And it turns out I didn't raise any more money, but then I suddenly had all the stuff I needed to actually shoot the movie. So that's totally what happened.
Brilliant. So have you started work on the costumes for Bluebeard then?
I'm determined to get more money this time and to not do that. To be more like that. I really want it. So I have been doing mood boards, storyboards, things like that, the things that a director is supposed to do.
Uh-huh.
But I'm stopping myself from doing anything a director doesn't normally do. And I'm determined to find enough money to hire designers and do the regular process, because I can't just spend years. I don't want to have years and years between films anymore. So we'll see. I mean, I think now I have enough. Again, the love which is popular enough that hopefully I can raise enough money this time so that we can do a faster process.
Does that mean that you're not going to be acting anymore either?
Well, I didn't act in The Love Witch.
No, you didn't. I was somewhat disappointed.
Well, I'm trying, rather than trying to take on more roles, I'm trying to give away roles. So acting was the first thing I gave up, and it was a big relief to not be having to act as well as do everything else. Because acting is a difficult job.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the toughest jobs on set. So not to have to do that was good. And so I also would like to not have to be decorating the set, for example.
I think that seems fair enough. I don't want to take up too much more of your time because I know you've been very good in giving us as much as you have. Just out of curiosity, we're having a big public debate in a couple of weeks' time at a film festival here, and we're getting into the art versus artist debate. And I would just be kind of interested in your take on that. Particularly kind of post Weinstein, where we're sort of, I think we're kind of looking back at filmmakers and productions and sort of seeing the behavior of certain individuals, pretty much ubiquitously men, and looking back at their work, and is that making it more problematic? Does that change how you view someone's work? Do you think?
Well, here's the. Oh, you mean does knowledge about how people have conducted themselves in the past change how I view their work?
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, what I'd have to say is that usually, if people if men are problematic, it shows in their work.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't been fans of most of the people that have come out and been condemned because there's a lot of misogyny and sexism in the work anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the exception to that is Roman Polanski, whose work I find really great. You know, I don't find the work to be problematic in its content or execution at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I struggle with that a little bit. But no, I don't. But so that's the only case where I maybe have to struggle. And I guess here's my real answer. And I know this sounds really cynical and terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that the number of men who are dastardly to women is so high in terms of the percentage, and especially men in power.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it's a question not of who's terrible, but who's been caught at being terrible. So I've lived my whole life knowing a lot of men who have been really bad to women, and being hurt by a lot of them, or some of them. And I haven't been in a position really to wholesale reject all of those men. What you do is hope that the men learn. And I feel like especially men who are maybe like sexually active in the 70s or so. See, that's kind of what my movie Viva is about.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how what was being promoted at the time in the culture was so toxic to women that most men felt like they had the freedom to behave that way towards women. Not only the freedom, but almost they were almost shamed if they didn't behave that way towards women, like they weren't a real man. So groping women, forcing yourself on women, picking up on young girls, that stuff was so in style, and it was so practiced by everyone, unless it was like someone who's considered like a family man, let's say, or someone who's like a very strict Christian or something.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else was behaving that way. If you look back in movies, even mainstream movies at the time, you see how men treated women in movies, and it was considered completely fine.
Yeah.
So I think it's men really just haven't really had the awareness of women as people. I think for a lot of since the sexual revolution, I think men's awareness of women as people has not been very high up until recently when they've had to be aware of that. So this is one reason I love classic movies, is because they were before that time of that really extreme toxic misogyny and sexism that came into movies.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's what I mean when I say I don't like most of the movies that men make in the past few decades, because they're made with that mindset.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's so helpful unless it's to necessarily single out the few men who've been caught. It's more like changing the culture is what's important, I
think. I think that cynical that may have been, I think, is also very accurate, and I think it's a really good observation to make. And you know, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to ask you, particularly bearing in mind what I feel is coming from your work and how I'm responding to it, and I think how other people are responding to it. So thank you for doing that. And hopefully, your films are going to help influence people to sort of change that attitude as well. Because I think they should.
Yeah, if I can get, see, this is the interesting thing too, though, is that you would think that things are changing where people would be clamoring to work with me as a female, produce my films, my next film, as a female director working in Hollywood. That's not necessarily going to be the case, I'm realizing, because I'm seeing scripts that are extremely sexist. I get sent scripts that are amazingly sexist that nobody finds a problem with. And then I think some people have a problem with my script, thinking my script is sexist. So there's this weird, like people have been so indoctrinated by the masculinist culture that they possibly see like a woman in peril picture as like retrogressive or bad for women just because she's not like a kung fu artist. See what I mean? It's sort of like the environment is so screwy and it's so upside
down. I think that
so it's a situation where somebody like Quentin Tarantino is called a feminist filmmaker and I'm not. It's like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like that kind of environment that we're in, which is so crazy. And just because we have the female the Me Too movement doesn't necessarily mean that people know how to understand what they're seeing in a script. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it might be a struggle for me to get my film produced because people will actually read the script and misunderstand it. In the rather than realizing it's like a radical movie for women, they might actually find it. They might actually misunderstand it 150%, the way a lot of people did with The Love Witch. So that's an uphill struggle.
It's a massive issue, and it's one I think we could probably talk about for a couple of hours just on its own right. Certainly, I'm going to be one of the many people who's there watching, waiting to see what you do with it, and to see your take. And actually, I think that I think there is potential for a movement that picks up on those pictures again, because they are great kind of pictures, and I think that their stories are very relevant. The likes of a Gaslight being remade today. I think there's a real
interest in it. I think there's a real interest in those kinds of pictures again, and I really think that Phantom Thread is a good example of a like a mainstream male filmmaker taking on that type of subject, and I thought that was a great film.
But I think that there again we got the same problem. It's more men shooting these things, and what we need is more more female perspectives on these things in every stage of the production.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that's true. Yeah, but it's a great step in the right direction, because if it's almost like if a man is making films like that, it does validate that type of script or process for if anybody else wants to then do it.
so basically, all of Hollywood is like a lane waiting for a guy to validate what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh dear. Anna, I don't want to hold you back any longer. Thank you very much for taking the time out to chat to us.
Oh, thank you. It's been really great talking to you.
Yeah, we could talk for hours. Hopefully, at some point, we might get to see you in these shores and do this in person at some point.
Or maybe when. Well, where are you in London?
We're actually in Belfast, so we're in Northern Ireland.
Oh, in Belfast. Well, okay. So next time I'm in Belfast, I'll give you a ring, and then we can have that chat for hours.
Do that. That'd be brilliant. All right, Anna. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, cheers.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you once again to Anna for spending time chatting with us. If you'd like to find out more about Anna's work, watch her films and read her blog, you can get all that and more via her website, lifeofastar.com. Now, we'd love to hear from you, so if you've enjoyed this podcast, you can leave us a review on iTunes or pop us a message direct via our Facebook page or Twitter. Just look for CinePunked. You can check out our catalogue of episodes and upcoming events via our site at www.cinepunked.com. You've been listening to me, Robert JE Simpson, in conversation with Anna Biller. Our producer was Ben Simpson. Until next time, thanks for listening.